My brother didn't even flinch when I walked in. Not when I stepped through the arched front gate. Not when I stood in the aisle, alone in the middle of the crowd. Not even when he climbed up to speak on stage. He kept his eyes forward, like I didn't exist. It was the first time I'd set foot on the estate in 13 years. The house I'd grown up in, now lined with uniformed servers and soft piano music floating out from the open terrace, felt like a museum built on silence. Perfect hedges, white lanterns hanging in rows, people in sleek black outfits murmuring over wine and grief, careful not to break the fragile etiquette of death. I wasn't invited. Of course I wasn't. Not to his funeral. My father, Commander Douglas Marlowe, retired, was being buried today. Decorated, honored, mourned by the people who once sat in our dining room and whispered about his unruly daughter, the one who never quite fit, who didn't follow the family script. I paused at the edge of the garden. People streamed into the memorial area, old Navy officers, former cadets, neighbors, even politicians. There was a podium set up in front of the fountain, white chairs neatly arranged in rows. A portrait of him, imposing, dignified, cold-eyed, stood beside the casket. A folded flag rested atop the mahogany, lit like a seal over a secret. I stood there and waited. No one greeted me. No one even looked at me. My mother, seated in the front row in an elegant black sheath dress and pearls, turned once to speak to my brother Ryan. Her tone was low, eyes sharp, posture unshaken by grief. She looked relieved, like something had finally been resolved. Ryan was radiant in that rehearsed way he always was, strong jaw, polished shoes, his medals perfectly aligned on his navy blue dress uniform. The golden child, the decorated son, Lieutenant Commander Ryan Marlowe, my younger brother by 2 years, my replacement in every family photo. I had made the mistake of wearing a plain suit. No designer label, no uniform, no insignia to prove I belonged. A server passed by me without stopping. I hadn't been offered a program, or a seat, or even a glance. Just like before, the last time I stood among them was at Ryan's officer commissioning ceremony. I showed up late, after an overnight flight from Istanbul. My luggage lost, my hair tied back in a knot. I hadn't slept in days. I'd crossed 3 time zones and 2 war zones. But no one cared. Back then, my mother looked me up and down and asked, "Did you forget how to dress for an occasion?" And Ryan, he laughed, loud enough for the others to hear. "She's been out in the desert for too long," he said, nudging one of his friends. That was the night I left early. Tonight, it felt no different. Except this time, my father was dead, and I didn't even get a whisper of acknowledgement. I sat in the last row, behind a hedge, partially hidden from view. The woman next to me glanced sideways, unsure if I was staff or someone who'd wandered in. The eulogy began. Ryan took the podium with practiced ease. The microphone caught every word, every pause, every carefully timed breath. My father was a man of principle. He taught us discipline, pride, and sacrifice. He gave everything to this country and to his family. To his family, I felt my chest tighten. He gave everything to them, to the people who met his standards, to the children who didn't challenge his authority. I wasn't one of them. I could still remember the cold slap of his words when I announced I wasn't joining the Navy like the rest. I wanted something else, something quieter, harder, something that didn't come with medals and parades. "You're wasting your potential," he said. "You'll be invisible. Is that what you want?" He never forgave me for stepping out of the spotlight. And now, standing there in front of our polished family, my brother was rewriting the past like I never existed, erasing me with a smile. "The commander loved his country more than anything," Ryan continued. "He believed in service, and he believed in the legacy of our name. I hope we all continue to honor that legacy." Applause followed, restrained, respectful. I didn't clap. I just sat there, listening to the wind move through the white floral arrangements, listening to people exchange memories of a man I barely recognized. The man who taught me to swim by throwing me into deep water. The man who stood silent when my acceptance letter from Georgetown arrived. No hug, no congratulations, just a nod and a muttered, "You'll be back." The man who told my mother to stop wasting energy worrying about me when I disappeared for months overseas. And now I was just a shadow at his funeral. After the ceremony, People gathered around the terrace for drinks and polished conversation. I stayed by the garden wall, watching from a distance. Aunt Meredith walked past me, didn't even blink. My cousin Elaine did a double take, but quickly looked away, pretending she hadn't seen me. Even the family dog barked at me like I was a stranger. I was invisible. By design. They had cut me out like a tumor, quietly, effectively. No fights, no confrontations, just the slow, clinical procedure of forgetting. And I let them. Until now. Because something had changed. Something had called me back. It wasn't guilt. It wasn't grief. It was the letter. Delivered to my apartment in Berlin. No return address. No signature. Just 4 words scribbled in firm, deliberate handwriting. Come home. It's time. I don't know why I listened. Maybe I needed to see for myself that there was nothing left here for me. Maybe I needed to close the chapter with my own eyes. Maybe I needed to say goodbye to the girl who once begged for her father's approval and never got it. But as I turned to leave the garden, a car I hadn't noticed pulled up to the front of the estate. Not just a car. A black government SUV. License plate shielded. Engine silent. And for the first time all afternoon, people began to murmur. Heads turned. My brother frowned. My mother stood. The rear door opened. And everything shifted. The first time my father told me I was a disappointment, I was 12. It wasn't a scream or a threat. Nothing dramatic. Just 5 flat words spoken across a polished oak dining table while the silverware gleamed and my mother blinked into her wine glass. You're not what I expected. That was it. No explanation. No second glance. Just a passing judgment, like a weather report, as if I'd failed some test I didn't even know I was taking. My brother Ryan sat across from me, back straight, already in his JROTC uniform, even though he was a freshman. His chest puffed like he already knew he'd be wearing real metal someday. He didn't laugh. He didn't smirk. He just looked at me like he agreed. I think that was the moment I began to vanish from their vision. Not physically, of course. I still lived under that roof, still ate at that table. But emotionally, I began slipping through the cracks, and no one reached out to stop me. Growing up in the Marlowe house meant structure. Control. Expectations. We had dinner at 1900 hours sharp, even on weekends. We addressed our father as sir. We wore pressed clothes to breakfast. Lateness was a form of betrayal. My mother played her part in the machine. Polished, composed, always 5 steps behind my father. She loved us in her own way, mostly through absence, sometimes through passive worry, but her priority was always the illusion of perfection. I was the static in their signal. I didn't want to be a naval officer. I didn't dream of war rooms or parades. I didn't care for medals or titles. I wanted books, languages, solitude. I spent afternoons in the back of the library reading about cities I'd never seen and operations that had no names. That made me an alien in my own home. Ryan, on the other hand, was born for their world. Tall, charismatic, good at following orders. He memorized our father's commands like scripture. He called him sir with pride. He won debates, mastered drills, smiled for photos at all the right angles. At 17, I applied for a fellowship in international security studies. My father laughed when I told him, "You think that's service? You think writing essays makes you brave?" He never read my application. Just told me if I wasn't wearing a uniform by the time I turned 20, I wouldn't be welcome under his roof. So I left before he had the chance to lock the door. I moved into a friend's apartment above a dusty bookstore in Boston. Took odd jobs. Waited tables. Translated papers for professors who barely remembered my name. And when I wasn't working, I studied. Eventually, I caught the attention of someone who did read what I wrote. A man from an agency that didn't wear medals in public. Who spoke in terms of probabilities and consequences instead of family legacies. Who slid a file across a cafe table and said, "We could use someone like you." That's when my second life began. I trained in silence. No announcement. No ceremony. No one clapping for me in a pressed white uniform. I learned how to move without being seen. How to blend in and disappear. How to read the truth in a politician's twitch. How to extract information without a threat. My job wasn't glory. It was precision. My assignments took me across the globe. Conflict zones, covert meetings, back doors into regimes that never made the news. I was the quiet footstep in the room before the lights came on. I was the name that never appeared in reports but always showed up in results. And through it all, I stayed away from home. Not because I hated them, but because I didn't belong there anymore. They didn't know where I was. They didn't care to ask. Occasionally, a distant relative would mention the daughter with vague discomfort. I heard rumors that my mother told people I worked for the government, that she kept a photo of me in the back of a drawer but never brought it out. Ryan, of course, continued the family brand. Promoted, decorated, public. When he made the cover of Military Living magazine, I saw it in a cafe in Prague. He was holding a folded flag. My father was beside him. I stared at the photo for a long time, not out of jealousy, just observation. They looked like they'd finally edited me out of the frame. But there were moments, small, dissonant things, that reminded me they hadn't fully forgotten. A package delivered to my hotel in Marrakesh. No name, just a scarf I had lost as a teenager. A wire transfer that cleared at just the right time to get a local operative medical treatment. A note slipped into a book I picked up in Geneva. Keep watching. I never found out who sent those things, but I had my suspicions. And then came the letter. Slid under the door of my Berlin flat. No postage. No signature. Just my name. Handwritten. No title, no rank in one line. Come home. It's time. At first, I thought it was bait. A breach. I had it scanned. Checked for prints. Nothing. But something in me knew it was real. And so, after years of silence, I returned. To a house I didn't recognize. To a family that no longer saw me. To a funeral that had no seat saved for me. And still I came. Because something deeper than duty pulled me there. Because I had the sinking sense that someone wanted me to see something. To be seen. Maybe one last time. I didn't know then what the letter truly meant. Not until the black SUV pulled up. Not until the silence around me shattered. The car door opened with a soft mechanical click, and for a brief moment, the entire atmosphere shifted, as if the garden, the guests, the meticulously planned event were suddenly part of a different world. Conversations halted mid-sentence. Heads turned. The SUV was matte black, clearly government-issued, with no visible tags, no markings, and windows so dark they reflected the summer sunlight like obsidian. It didn't belong on a residential street. Not on my mother's pristine driveway. Not here at his funeral. Out stepped a woman. Mid-50s, silver streaks in her cropped dark hair, eyes sharp as ice beneath steel-framed glasses. No one in the crowd recognized her. But I did. Director Isabel Keene. Deputy Director of Covert Operations, Intelligence Bureau East. She was the reason I made it through Istanbul. The reason I walked away from Tehran without a scratch. And now, she was walking into this place, into my family's fortress of curated legacy, wearing a plain black suit and heels that somehow didn't make a sound on the marble path. My mother stood from her chair. Ryan straightened instinctively, his military reflexes kicking in even before his mind caught up. Guests shifted, trying to assess the situation. Some whispered. Some stared. One elderly Navy retiree adjusted his tie nervously. Keene didn't look at any of them. She walked with purpose through the crowd, not bothering to greet or pause or explain. Her gaze was fixed on me. As she approached, her expression didn't soften. She wasn't here to grieve. She was here for me. I stood slowly, aware now that the entire memorial was watching, every eye shifting from my brother to me, from the decorated officer to the daughter they pretended no longer existed. Keene stopped 2 feet in front of me. She didn't ask for permission. She didn't lower her voice. "Agent Marlowe," she said. "We're due in 40 minutes. We've got an emergency brief out of Langley. You're needed on the call." A murmur rippled through the crowd. Someone behind me gasped. My mother's face went white. Keene continued, louder this time, turning just slightly so the words could be heard by all. "European Operations Command has approved your relocation to D.C., effective immediately. The team is waiting for your signal." My brother's jaw tensed. I could see him calculating, recalibrating, trying to make sense of what he was hearing, trying to decide whether to speak. But he didn't. Keene reached into her blazer and handed me a folder, thick, stamped with a red seal and a watermark that only a handful of people in the country would even recognize. She spoke again, voice firm but respectful. I understand this is a family occasion, but protocol demands your authorization now. Shall we? Silence. Utter, crystalline silence. I heard the clink of a glass being set down somewhere on the terrace. The wind rustled the white drapes by the porch. Ryan took a step forward. I'm sorry, he said, his voice brittle. Who exactly are? Keen didn't turn to him. She didn't have to. She simply said, Deputy Director Keen, Central Intelligence. And then, after a beat, I'm here for Agent Marlowe. The air snapped. You could feel it. The shock, the unraveling of assumptions. The guests looked at me differently now, like I had transformed in front of them, like the woman they had dismissed as a ghost, an embarrassment, a stray, had suddenly become something far more dangerous. Keen handed me one final item, an envelope, no markings, just my name, first and last, in familiar cursive handwriting. It was my mother's. The moment I saw it, my throat tightened. The entire scene blurred around the edges. For a split second, I wasn't in a funeral garden. I was 12 again, hiding under the staircase, trying not to cry while my mother sat silently upstairs, pretending not to hear. The envelope was light, one sheet of paper inside. I didn't open it. Not yet. Keen leaned in, voice low now. She told me to give it to you in front of them. Said it was important you be seen for who you are. All of you. I nodded, pulse hammering. I stepped forward. For the first time, I looked directly at my mother. Her mouth was parted slightly, her eyes not cold, but unsure. And then, I turned to my brother. His face was red. Is this some kind of joke? He said. You're telling me she's... But he stopped himself, because he saw it now. The folder, the badge clipped inside, the envelope with our mother's handwriting. The agent beside me, whose very presence was reshaping the air in this place. I didn't need to answer him. I didn't need to explain who I was anymore. They could see it now, what they had tried so hard not to see. I was not a failure. I was not lost. I was not gone. I had become something they could never have imagined. Excuse me, I said quietly. I'm needed. And with that, I followed Keen. Every step I took toward the waiting SUV felt like a severing and a return. As I reached the door, Keen paused to speak once more. To the crowd. To them. To those wondering, she said, not bothering to hide her tone. This woman saved 2 embassies, dismantled a trafficking network spanning 5 nations, and kept 5 U.S. assets alive in an operation your newspapers will never know about. Then to me, they'll never understand Agent Marlowe. But we do. And for the first time in years, I believed it. The SUV door closed with a muted thud behind me, sealing out the buzz of disbelief still vibrating in the garden. I sat in the cool interior beside Director Keen, the folder she'd handed me resting on my lap like a weighted truth. Through the tinted windows, I could still see their faces, frozen in that moment of collective realization. Ryan stood stiffly, his hands clenched at his sides, staring after the car as though trying to pull back time. My mother had returned to her seat, but not before casting me one final unreadable glance. Whether it was regret, fear, or recognition, I couldn't yet say. Keen didn't speak. She didn't need to. Her presence alone had done what I never could in all my years away, unearth the truth. I wasn't the one who'd failed this family. They had failed me. I turned the envelope over in my hand, my mother's handwriting steady and precise across the cream-colored paper. It had no address, no date, just my name, Elena Marlowe. I opened it slowly. Inside was a single sheet, 4 lines, written in careful, deliberate script. I watched you walk away with nothing but silence and strength. I couldn't protect you then, but I see you now. You live here because of me, and because of who you chose to become. I stared at the words until they blurred. I had spent years building armor, brick by brick, learning to live without them, without this house, this history. But in 4 lines, she cracked it. She had known, not just about my work, but about me. I felt Keen's eyes on me, calm, observant. She said you'd understand, she said quietly. I do, I whispered. And I did. My mother, quiet and compliant as she had seemed, had been watching. Not just passively, intentionally. The little things that never made sense, the cleared tuition balance, the forged hospital contact in Istanbul, The dossier that slipped past the firewall in Cairo. They hadn't been coincidences. She had pulled strings behind closed doors, stayed hidden behind my father's looming shadow. She hadn't been powerless. She had been strategic, and she had waited for this moment, for me to be seen by those who had erased me. Director Keene broke the silence. Do you know how many people were watching that scene back there? I turned to her, puzzled. What do you mean? Half that guest list has ties to the Defense Department, contractors, congressional liaisons. The Marlowe name still echoes in certain rooms. But now they'll remember yours. I didn't want this to be a spectacle. It wasn't, she said. It was a correction. I looked down at my hands. All these years, I thought I had chosen the shadows. But maybe the shadows had simply been where I was allowed to survive, until I no longer needed to hide. Keene tapped the folder. When you're ready, open it. It's your new post. DC permanent rotation. You'll be working directly with Operations Command. No more field, unless you request it. Why now? I asked, voice quiet. Because it's time, she said. And because some of us have always known your worth, even when your own blood didn't. The SUV slowed and turned down a quiet road lined with elm trees and high stone fences. We weren't heading back to Langley. Not yet. Where are we going? Keene smiled slightly. Somewhere she asked us to take you. She left instructions. I blinked. My mother. Keene nodded. After your last operation, she sent a message through an encrypted channel. Said if anything ever happened to your father, she wanted you to see something. I sat back, stunned. She knew who to contact. She was the contact. The silence that followed was like thunder. Keene turned her gaze to the road. Your mother was one of the Bureau's silent donors. Classified supporter. She never took credit. She just made sure we kept our best assets alive. That included you. I couldn't speak. I could barely breathe. We pulled into a long, narrow drive, tucked between dense trees. A small stone cottage appeared. A far cry from the Marlowe estate, but quiet, secure, unassuming. Keene parked. She came here often. Said it was where she could think. Your name's on the deed now. I stepped out of the SUV. The air smelled of pine and old earth. Peaceful. The cottage was simple. Shuttered windows, a wooden porch, a single key waiting in the lock. Keene handed me a phone. She recorded one message. Audio only. Play it when you're ready. I took it with trembling hands. Inside, the cottage was warm, lived in, filled with quiet care. Bookshelves lined with world atlases and military memoirs. A worn leather chair facing the fireplace. And on a side table, a framed photo. It was me, 10 years old, smiling, hair tangled, holding a field guide to languages of Central Asia. My mother had kept this, all these years. I sank into the chair, holding the phone, my heart pounding. I pressed play. Her voice filled the room, softer than I remembered, fragile but resolute. Elena, if you're hearing this, he's gone. And you've come home. I couldn't tell you then what I should have, but I never stopped believing in you. I was proud before you ever left, and terrified every day after. But I knew you had something he could never understand. You didn't need to conquer. You endured. You survived him. And then you saved people. People who never even knew your name. But I did, and I will never forget it. The message ended. I sat in silence, not weeping, not breaking, just breathing. For the first time in years, I felt the weight of my choices, of my solitude, lifting, replaced by something I'd never expected to feel again. Belonging. Not to them, not to the legacy, but to myself, to the woman I'd become when no one was watching. I stepped back outside, the evening sun soft across the trees, and I understood something. My mother hadn't saved me. She'd given me the tools to save myself. And now it was time to live on my own terms. Visible, respected, free. I stayed in the cottage for 3 days. No briefings, no signals, no missions, just silence. Not the kind I was raised with, the oppressive kind that was used to wound, to erase, but the real kind. The clean kind. The kind that gives you space to feel, instead of hiding what you already know. Each morning I walked the perimeter of the woods. I let the air move through me like medicine. I sat by the fire each night, listening to my mother's message again and again. Not because I didn't remember it, but because every word sounded different depending on the hour. One night, her voice made me angry. Another night, it made me feel like a child again. But on the third night, it just made me whole. The fourth morning, I packed my bag. Director Keene had sent no follow-up. She knew I'd return when I was ready. That was always the deal. I stood at the edge of the porch, the gravel path ahead of me, the trees swaying in a wind that smelled like rain. I turned the key in the door, locked it quietly, and left the envelope on the table with a note of my own. 4 words, just like hers. I see you now, too. The SUV was waiting at the end of the drive. Not the same one from the funeral. This one was less formal, more discreet, unmarked and familiar. When I climbed inside, the driver didn't speak. He knew who I was. He knew where I was going. Langley. Back to the life I'd chosen. But it felt different now. Not because my work had changed, but because I had faced the ghosts. Not in combat or confession, but by being seen, fully, in front of the very people who had once erased me. The family name, the medals, the dinner speeches, they didn't matter anymore. Because the people who mattered had seen the real version of me, the one they never expected to stand in the sun. As we neared the city, I got the message. It came in as a direct notification on my secure line. Operational clearance approved. Relocation immediate. A second one followed, encrypted. Your voices wait now. Use it. DK. DK meant Keene. Always did. And I knew exactly what she meant. It wasn't about vengeance. It was about voice. 4 years, I had spoken only in coded languages, in shadows and signals. But now, they were making space for my presence, for me to lead. I arrived at the facility just past noon. The receptionist stood as I entered, nodding slightly. Director Keene is in ops, but she said to take your time. I nodded, moving through the halls I knew so well. Past the wall of stars. Past the rows of photos, the ones with eyes blurred, names redacted. I moved like a ghost, silent, precise. But this time, I wasn't invisible. When I reached my floor, my access card clicked without hesitation. Inside my new office, yes, office, not station, there was a small envelope waiting on the desk. No address. Just one word, typed clean on the front. Legacy. Inside, a single document. It was my name. And below it, Acting Division Lead, European Covert Operations. I set the paper down slowly. Let the moment settle. And then I looked up at the glass window across from me. I could see my reflection now, sharp, defined, not lost in anyone else's shadow. Not Ryan's. Not my father's. Not even my mother's. Mine. There's a certain clarity that comes after years of being underestimated. When you survive long enough outside the circle, you begin to see how fragile it really is. How much of it is performance, posture, ritual, and how easily it shatters when truth is spoken aloud. At the funeral, I didn't say much, but I didn't need to, because Director Keene said it for me. In front of them. And my mother, she said it in her way, the only way she ever could, quietly, behind the curtain, pulling strings no one saw. In the end, she didn't need to rescue me. She needed me to rescue myself, and I did, by walking away from a legacy that didn't see me, by building one of my own. A few hours later, I walked out of the facility and into the humid July air. The sky above Virginia was blue and streaked with white clouds. I stood there, letting it wash over me, and I thought about Ryan. I imagined him standing in the kitchen of that perfect family house, asking questions that no one could answer, trying to reconcile the story he'd been told his whole life with the one that stood before him, briefed and saluted in front of the people who used to call her a mistake. He wouldn't call. He wouldn't write. And I wouldn't ask him to. We were finished with the part of our lives where one of us had to pretend the other didn't exist. That chapter was closed. What remained now was mine alone. As I walked toward my car, I passed a small group of new recruits entering the building. Young, fresh, eyes full of questions. One of them paused. He looked at me like he knew, not who I was, but what I was. Something unspoken. "Ma'am," he said quietly, stepping aside with a nod. And in that small gesture I felt it. Respect. Not the kind you're born into. The kind you earn. The kind that doesn't need a name to be understood. I nodded once and kept walking. I didn't need applause, or medals, or revenge. Just one truth. I had walked into a house where I was never welcome, and walked out as the only one they would never forget. That day, my mother finally called me by my name. But it was the day the world learned to say it, too.